You're about to watch part 3 of Popcorn's review of the year. For the previous 2 parts, please return to our YouTube channel. August, of course. I just want to touch on a couple of thoughts here, because August is usually a very dull and quiet month, but we had the riots after the horrific incident in Southport. And I can never get my head around rioting. I mean, sorry, to be clear about it, I'm against rioting, but I can never understand. I'm sure there's substantial academic literature on this, but what actually acts as the spark that lights the blue touch paper that then kicks everything off? How's it spread? But it clearly shows. I appreciate that the horrific Southport incident was the sort of trigger for it, although it seemed people were misinterpreting all sorts of data. But it seemed, didn't it, Sam, that this was a sort of show already, less than a month into the Labour government, and I'm not blaming the Labour government for the riots at all, but that there is massive, widespread discontentment across the UK, which was, and we can reflect on this a bit later since, has in no way been remedied by a fresh new government coming to power and spreading optimism. But what were your thoughts at that time? I mean, it's not the first time we've had riots in the UK. These come around occasionally, but usually speak to some. And I appreciate there's only a relatively small number of people involved in them, right? The overwhelming majority of the British population were not rioting. But what did you make of it? Does this speak to a major discontent certainly in certain parts and certain demographics of the UK population, that just sort of something could just light that tinderbox almost at any point now?
Absolutely, and I think that in some ways it shows the failure of the Conservatives over the last 5 years. I think that the election of Boris in 2019 was semi-Trumpian moment, a moment where a lot of people who felt like they'd been ignored and left behind and excluded from the political process for a generation or more finally felt like, as they did with Brexit, that they were that they were re-engaged, they were taking a stand, and they were voting for programs that would make a change in their life. But unfortunately, unlike Donald Trump, Boris failed to actually do any of the take any of the steps that he said he would around immigration. I mean, I think I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think if I recall correctly, immigration shot up very significantly under the Conservatives after 2019 compared to where it was beforehand, which is the exact opposite of what the Red Wall was voting for. You had, contrary to what a lot of people thought, the feedback we got from a lot of the newly elected Red Wall MPs was that what their constituents wanted was opportunities rather than handouts. They weren't looking for the Department of Levelling Up to build another rec centre in Workington. What they wanted was reforms that would bring new businesses and jobs and opportunities to the north, that would let them sort of get up on their own feet rather than. And I mean, one of the things that that the Trump voters in America have worried about over the last 10 years has been the feelings of despair, and I think despair probably sums up how a lot of people in the Red Wall seats felt as well. So I think it's just a sense of complete dislocation with the electoral system, and
The electoral
maybe.
system. These people were rioting in favour of the single transferable vote mechanism, were they? That's a novel theory.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into electoral reform, but I do wonder whether or not something like proportional representation would see these people a bit more represented.
Wow. Okay.
I, am as a New Zealander, I've got a first-hand experience of the benefits of PR, but I don't want to turn this into a PR podcast. But I do feel, but what I meant was more the they voted for change in 2016, nothing had happened. They voted for change in 2019, nothing had happened, and maybe they'd either voted for change or not bothered to turn up in 2024, and then weeks later you get this horrific crime. And I just think I definitely do not think it was sort of the far right organizing, but it was just
these things happen
high
sort of
rage.
spontaneously in some sort
Yeah.
of weird way. Andrew, what was your take on it? This sign of real disquiet in certain parts, certainly of the UK.
I agree with with just about everything that Sam has said there. It wasn't so much rioting in Hull, not far away from me. It was looting. I mean, people were just helping themselves to various things. They were helping themselves to Greg's sausage rolls as well, which I found rather amusing in some way. I mean, it's serious, but if you're going to loot something, are you really going to loot a Greg's sausage roll? It was a lot of kids involved, and there were a lot of people who were, shall we say, known to the police anyway. And they were just sort of local criminals. But you look at the way that the courts dealt with these people very robustly, and quite rightly so. I'm not disagreeing with that. But a lot of the people who are really sort of disaffected with the whole political scene in the UK also look at what happened in Rochdale and Oldham, Rochdale and Rotherham. And they look at those grooming gangs, and nothing was ever done. Everything was sort of swept under the carpet. And then they look at this very, very swift justice, or they look at people putting tweets out, or I mean, there's that Conservative councillor's wife who did put out a particularly odious tweet.
But she's got a long stretch.
She's got a 3-year sentence. I mean, it's completely disproportionate to what she actually did. I mean, she didn't actually, if her intent, shall we say, was to incite a riot, incite violence, she certainly didn't succeed in that. So it was completely disproportionate. So I think you got a lot of people who just feel forgotten about. Brexit, the referendum in 2016, brought a lot of people into polling stations who'd never been in a polling station in their lives before, and certainly people who haven't voted for 20 or 30 years. And as Sam quite rightly said, in 2019, that was a get Brexit done thing. This is what we voted for. Let's get it over the line. But nothing's really changed since then.
Yeah.
And just to touch on the voting system, I used to be a first past the post man, but in the past 10 years, I've just slowly changed my mind. And we end up with an election result where Labour gets roughly a third of the popular vote and gets 2/3 of the seats. Now, is it hardly surprising then that there is a reform surge coming now, that people are actually desperate for change? Which is why, I know we'll probably touch on this a little later, but it's why I think the reform is going to do extremely well, because I think people realise that if they want change, they're going to have to vote for it in vast numbers, because the voting system is not really going to allow them to do it in any incremental way.
Annunziata, help me fulfil Sam's dream of this not becoming a podcast about proportional representation.
I remain entirely opposed to proportional representation. I've been elected as someone on a list. I think it is a corrupt and baseless, undemocratic system. We could go into that for hours. But what my real takeaway was from the riots was that very, very sane, normal British people were furious. They didn't quite know why they were furious necessarily, but it was a culmination. The government, or the powers that be, were not telling them the truth, that there were rumours going around the internet about who the perpetrator of the horrific events were, and they assumed they were true because the government had not told them the truth on so many other things. They certainly here, the asylum seekers that were apparently not coming but were here was proof that the government lies. The fact that crime has gone up, this and that, simultaneously but unconnected to the fact that asylum seekers have come. It wasn't racism. It was the sense of betrayal by the government. It didn't matter that it was Labour there at the time. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It could have been anyone.
Yeah.
But the fact that government after government after government, and we've got to be honest about this, that the mass immigration hugely started under Tony Blair. 2004 is a complete watershed in terms of numbers in this country.
Well, it's still going up and up though, right?
And it's still going up and up.
Well, actually, I think actually it's gone down a bit this year, but from colossal highs,
and last year's were just revised massively up.
Yeah, that's true.
Will happen to this year's. But whether it's legal or illegal, it's not something anyone in this country's ever voted for. They've never been asked. It doesn't matter what voting system we've got.
Well, it's specific they voted against. It's not just they haven't voted for it. They've made it pretty clear that these sort of numbers are unacceptable to them, and the political elite has failed to do anything about it. Has either not shown the will or the ability to do anything about it.
They've talked about illegal.
Yeah.
Yes. But actually the legal immigration is 10 times higher.
Yeah, yeah.
That when you look at the total figures, we've got, what was it, 60,000 come over on boats from France. That gets all the headlines.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's 750,000 come here legally.
Yeah.
And that's what the public haven't had a say on, and that's why it sparked such anger, such visceral anger, that very, very normal people were saying and doing things that they would never do.
I want to move on to September and October, which I'm going to kind of wrap together as the Conservative leadership race, which have, got underway and obviously in July as soon as Sunak resigns, but is underway in earnest in September and October. And we have 6 candidates in the field: Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, Priti Patel and Mel Stride. I mean, we took a very long time to decide who the new leader of the Conservative Party should be, and for the final 4, it straddled party conference, of course, making the party conference more of a kind of hustings, a mega hustings than anything else. We obviously all followed it with very, very deep interest. I have got a complaint against one of the candidates. One of my hobbies is collecting political merchandise, and I have no Mel Stride merchandise. I need to get my hands on a Mel Stride banner, baseball cap, badge, carrier bag, whatever. I've got none of it. I've got merch from all of the other 5, but I need to collect the set now. And so, Mel, if you're watching, send me a baseball cap, all right? Or any other piece of merch. I need to collect the set. We obviously had a packed programme of events at party conference ourselves, where we had 2 of the leadership candidates joined us in our think tank marquee, James Cleverly and Robert Jenrick. And we sort of, although we didn't really have a very formal decision-making process, as a kind of collective, as a cohort, we decided that we thought Jenrick was the best candidate. Amongst PopCon supporters, at least on our opinion panel survey, it was always quite evenly split between Jenrick and Badenoch, with a slight lead to Robert. So our database was disproportionately pro-Jenrick. Had it been left just to PopCon supporters, Robert would have won. I guess I want to ask each of you, did we go about the Conservative leadership election in the right way, taking a long time to reflect on an historic defeat? Were you surprised that Kemi prevailed? In the end, in the last 10 or 12 days, I wasn't surprised, but I did think that Robert had a pretty good chance at the outset. And then, of course, we had that ludicrous anomaly of, Cleverly going from sort of absolutely nailed on to missing out by being on the ballot on 1 vote. This is even harder to explain in my mind than, well, perhaps not even harder. It's in the same category as Rishi Sunak announcing an early general election while the heavens open and soak him. Andrew, I'll start with you. What was your take of the whole leadership election malarkey?
We had to have a longish leadership election. The last thing we needed was sort of a knee-jerk response and someone being put in too soon. I do think that it could have been curtailed a little bit. I didn't think it needed to go until, was it the 2nd of November, I think? I think that was a little too long. I mean, we could have had 2 candidates at the party conference, and we then could have sort of gone straight to the members and have the whole thing sewn up a good sort of 2 or 3 weeks earlier,
and have the new leader in place in time for the budget, which we didn't.
Yeah,
it's worth saying Sunak's response to the budget was brilliant, actually, but nevertheless, he was obviously the outgoing man, not the incoming man.
He was brilliant, actually. Just touching on that, it was the best speech I think I've ever heard him give. I mean, why he couldn't have been more like that when he was
Low
the Prime
bar there,
Minister.
Andrew. The only other time you've heard him speak was outside of the toilets in Yorkshire.
And he didn't say much then, I can assure you. But no, I think it could have all been done a little bit sooner. Also, further ahead from further away from the US elections as well, because Kemi was announced as leader, and then sort of 3 days later, Donald Trump had won.
Well, I'm going to get
onto
the US. Don't so yeah. Let's,
yeah. But
let's focus on the much more important election first: Badenoch versus Jenrick.
Was I surprised that she won in the end? Not in the end, but in a long campaign, then of course one candidate is going to come forward, and one candidate is going to do it. I think that she had probably a better conference publicly. I don't think actually if you were at the conference, and she was constantly turning up late to things. I think one event she didn't bother turning up to at all. But the thing is, that didn't really get out of the conference very much. It wasn't reported in the media or anything like that. I think Robert was a little bit lackluster. He played it rather safe, thinking he was the front runner, and that didn't quite work out for him. So in the end, she won very comfortably, and I probably wasn't surprised. But I was delighted, and I think we all were, that we had two right-of-centre candidates to vote on. I mean, we all thought that we were going to get basically someone from the right and a wet, because that's the way it's traditionally been in the past. But we didn't. We had two candidates from the right, so that was good news. Although I'm sure that those from the left of the Conservative Party, the One Nation lot, probably disagree with me on that.
Yeah. Annunziata, what was your take on the whole shenanigans and the outcome?
I don't entirely agree with Andrew, which is unusual. I think it wasn't Roberts to lose. It was Kemi's to win. And she, much to my bemusement, won the conference. Cleverly won it totally, except for amongst her colleagues. He thought he was such a shoo-in that they decided not to get him into the final, that there were shenanigans going on behind the scenes in the MP. I think the entire thing should have been done, dusted, and decided by the members. That
Annunziata, I'm just going to put you on hold. Okay, you froze just for a moment on the screen. I think you're back now.
Someone called me. My apologies. Right. I will go again. The fact that MPs do get to very much limit the choice of the membership, the people who do every door knock, every leaflet delivery, I think is wrong. That yes, we were expecting a wet and a sound person, and that wasn't what we ended up getting. And I also was delighted we got two people on the right, but it shouldn't have been the MP's decision to put us in that situation.
That's really interesting. Do you think I'm betwixt and between on this? I mean, obviously the whole issue is overclouded by the fact that both Boris and Liz decisively won the members' ballot and then were summarily executed by members of Parliament. And I want to see, I mean, I was worried that the party might actually remove the right of members to have the final say. I mean, that's absolutely vital. But at the same time, I can't get my head around how you've got to plug in the parliamentary party somehow, right? Because the leader of the Conservative Party basically needs the support of Conservative MPs, maybe not an overwhelming majority of them, but we'd be in a really tricky position if the membership wanted Mr. X, but Mr. X only had the support of 3 Conservative MPs in Parliament, and the other, the overwhelming majority wanted something else. I've never quite worked. I mean, I actually wonder whether we should adopt Labour's electoral college system, that we all vote at once. You balance off the MPs as having a third of the vote, the rank and file membership as a third of the vote, and then perhaps you have a third of the vote of, I don't know, party officers or councillors or council leaders or something, those who hold office within the Conservative Party. But it is a problem. What do you think, Sam? Have we got the rules of engagement right? I mean, the whole Cleverly thing started to look ridiculous, didn't it? Because again, it was this sort of, what the hell's going on here? He was, as a betting man myself, I think he was 16 or 20 to 1 on to make the last 2, and then bang, he's out by a single vote.
Yeah, I think So I definitely think that we should keep the structure that we've already got. I think that we can't risk having a situation like Labour did with Jeremy Corbyn, that you'd have somebody in who's just constantly fighting firefighting against his
But we
own
get that
caucus.
anyway.
Good point. I mean, so I think
Day
that,
one of a new Conservative leader is start fighting for your political survival, from what I can judge.
So, and I mean, that's a much wider issue about the Conservative Party. The Conservative Parliamentary Party has no idea what it stands for anymore, and it's become such a broad church that that it's falling in around the foundations. But I do think the system we've got is broadly good. The problem is, and this definitely to me goes to show that members should have the final say, is that the MPs don't. Oh, Mark, are you still there?
Yeah, keep going, keep going.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, your face has disappeared. The is that MPs play around with the system too much. They don't. It seems like the MPs don't take it seriously. The members seem to take their role in the whole thing incredibly seriously. MPs seem to spend a lot of their time fiddling around with the numbers, trying to figure out who's the best person for them to face in the next round and how they can exclude their strongest rival. What they should be doing is taking things seriously and sensibly, and and just choosing who they think the two strongest candidates are, and then let the members decide. Stop trying to fiddle it with, trying to make it so that it's the most likely that your preferred candidate will have a weaker opposition.
Yeah.
Make it so that, and this is this is the same across all elections. You should always make the final two that if your person loses, it's not a total catastrophe. You shouldn't be trying to set it up that you put such a weak person in second place that if your preferred candidate loses, you've got an utter cretin or moron in the leadership role. And Conservative Party and Conservative Party MPs have really not stepped up on this. On the wider
which cretins or morons are you thinking of that they've let through onto the ballot paper? So
I couldn't possibly
name names.
I couldn't possibly comment, and obviously, no one in the Conservative Party would, as it currently stands, would be considered a cretin or a moron. But I do think, you can imagine situations where you would deliberately gerrymander things to put someone who's so completely inappropriate. But on the wider campaign, though, just a quick point is that I agreed with your original statement during your introduction of this, was that the Conservative Party needed a long time to consider and think about. I don't think we've used that time very well. I don't think that. I think that, unfortunately, I don't think Kemi Badenoch, much as I like her and much as I hope that she will over the next year or so put a lot more meat on the bones of what her perspectives is and policy views are. I don't think that she did enough to sort of lay out some specific areas so I think one of the advantages with Generic is that he said, we're going to leave the ECHR, and then you have a mandate now from the members and the wider party, so that the next Conservative Party manifesto could have said we should leave the ECHR. Kemi Badenoch said we're going to have a review of the ECHR, and that might, it may very well be that in 6 months' time, she will come back and say, actually, on reflection, we will need to leave. But I think that it makes it a lot more difficult for her to claim she's got a mandate to do that, and it makes it a lot easier for the elements within the parliamentary party, and there are a lot of them, who don't think that we should do that, to push back against the policy, saying, well, we voted for the non-leaving the ECHR candidates. Why, you don't have the authority to now force us to take that stance. Yeah. So I don't think.
Thank you for watching part 3 of Popcorn's review of the year. The final part will be released in the coming days, so please keep an eye on our socials for updates.